probably a good thing.
You're like,
This is a joint meeting with Senate Natural Resources and Senate Transportation. And we're here to hear about projects and difficulty the agency is having with active.
Yes, and so we're going to be hearing about some of those difficulties and would love to turn it over to you. Yes, welcome.
Thank you, Senators, for having me. My name is Jeremy Reed. I'm the Chief Engineer for the Agency of Transportation, and here to discuss some changes to the jurisdictional thresholds as they relate to transportation projects. Okay. So here's some recent projects, and the picture on the left, many of you know, is the Brattleboro Design Bid project. And in that project, we did not need a Act 50 permit. A jurisdictional opinion was issued and basically ruled that replacement of the two bridges did not constitute a significant change. And then two other notable projects, further to the right is the Divergent Diamond, and then and that does have an Act 250 permit, and then the Middleware Tunnel, which does not have an Act 250 permit. And I guess what I'm trying to illustrate here is that all of these projects have significant impacts, but certainly some differences of opinion of whether or not they need Act 250 permits
How
currently.
long was the Middlebury Tunnel?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
like 500 feet.
Yeah. It's pretty long.
Yeah, we went there.
Well, that's.
Can I ask a question about that? So I'm really surprised that that didn't have an active fifty permit because the, it moved a lot of rock and around and.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it was just a small town highway bridge project that was then expanded to sort of a greenscape type project, right?
But there was blasting. There was
Yep.
quite a bit of blasting.
Yeah, it was like mining, but it was like
Yeah.
horizontal mining.
Yeah, there was boring, yep.
Yeah, but big. So I'm just surprised that that wasn't.
Asked the question, trying to figure out in the scope of this, why some is and why some isn't.
And, you know, I think we've got a project that I'll mention later up in Linden, where we really relied on the Brattleboro decision as reasons for not needing an Act 250 permit. And basically, we were told, well, that was a mistake. We probably should have needed an Act 250 permit. And I just want to say on the onset, we're going to talk about the Linden project a little bit, but I've been an Act 250 commissioner for 7 years, no longer, and worked with that coordinator. So this is not in any way criticism of that coordinator. I find him very capable and competent, and really appreciate the work he's doing. I think this is just trying to show how some of these terms at the jurisdictional level can be interpreted differently by different people. And we're just trying to establish some consistent expectations for our projects moving forward. So with that, a little bit of history here. Obviously, the interstate started before Act 250 came into existence. And long story short, it was essentially deemed immune from those criteria through its completion in 1982. There are two things that largely trigger Act 250 jurisdiction now. And the one that we're principally talking about is substantial change, which is, as lawyers call it, a term of art. And what we're looking at is, does replacing a culvert to a larger culvert to meet today's environmental standards constitute a substantial change when virtually every other component of the asset stays the same once the project's completed? Meaning we're not adding lanes, we're not adding off ramps, we are just building a new structure to replace what is the now 60-year-old structure. We will also define transportation facility and the involved lands. So again, this is largely just talking about the history and how it interacts with Act 250. Act 250 included an exemption for state highway projects corridor hearing. And again, that was the mechanism in which they excluded the interstate through or for the Act 250 process. And again, that ultimately concluded in their early to mid 80s. So effectively, nearly 25 years passed under those exemptions. We're now at the stage where a lot of those earlier assets need to be either replaced or rehabilitated. And we're looking to effectively continue the same level of exemption or grandfather for just those level of maintenance, basically, right? Because we're just removing one culvert, replacing it in kind, or in kind to the degree that today's standards allow.
Sure.
Hmm.
Jeremy, when you're on your slides, when you reference sections, is that to a bill or that's some hypothetical bill?
Hypothetical. Yep.
So you're not, none of this is in reference to any.
Correct. Well, I've got language that we can disseminate, but yeah, this is just where kind of how it would be structured in any particular bill. Obviously, our interstates, any of these projects are largely funded with federal funds, and they go through the NEPA process and all other permitting requirements, which to a large degree makes the Act 250 process largely redundant. What it does do, though, is it allows us to save the time and any certainty related to the Act 250 permit process by not going through it.
So can you say that again? I am interested in how NEPA and Act 250 work together, because it seems like there is overlap. So do you do them sequentially, or can you use the reports that you do for NEPA?
So I think frequently what we do is we use the NEPA process to satisfy many of the 10 criteria within Act 250, but they are distinct processes. And again, this Linden project, we had clear NEPA, we had a contractor, and we saw a jurisdictional opinion, what we thought to be a formality, and then realized, okay, we are now under Act 250 jurisdiction, and that causes issues at that late stage in the game.
Okay, well, I just want to make sure I understand. So the normal procedure is to coordinate NEPA and Act 250.
Well, typically what we do is we take all of our NEPA requirements, and once those are obtained, those will satisfy many of the criteria within the Act 250 process.
Okay.
But they have to happen sequentially, not concurrently.
Sorry, what is NEPA?
Okay.
It's
It's the National Environmental Policy Act, and it dates back decades, and basically it says if you use federal funds, you need to follow and ensure environmental compliance, both at a state and federal level, and that touches everything from endangered species, water quality, air quality, you name it, basically. Historic preservation, sensitive archaeological sites, the entire gamut of anything that could be impacted through our projects from an environmental or a cultural lens, shall we say.
That's helpful. Thank you. So actually, before we leave that, so you're having to comply already with, for any federally funded project, with all of these regulations
Correct.
already?
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and obviously any state requirements as well, we'll get
Sure.
stream alteration permits, stormwater permits, et cetera.
Right, and there are things.
Question.
Okay.
So, given everything that's happening, are the feds still actually enforcing NEPA?
Yep, yeah, that.
Okay. I wonder how long that will happen.
Right, and then so I just want to point out, so there are things in Act 250 that are not in NEPA. It would be good to have a chart. Somebody somewhere has a chart about that. But Vermont has additional requirements that are very meaningful.
And I would offer that through our permits that we get through principally Agency of Natural Resources, but also the State Historic Preservation Office. Those largely ensure compliance with NEPA. So it's not like that's the additional step. We take our current regulatory framework and apply it, and generally that ensures compliance. So just a quick listing of projects that we have in the program right now. So for example, the Linden project's kind of the precipitating project for this effort. And it's tough to quantify projects that aren't yet through that design process. So that's the unknown. But Linden, we used some alternative contracting where we worked collaboratively with the contractor to try to reduce constructability issues, but also that allows us to kind of see what the various things cost. And if Linden was, and it was deemed to be jurisdictional, and if the staging area, because it was contiguous to the project site, was deemed to be an involved land, the property owner basically said, we're not going to let you use the staging area because we don't want our property encumbered in perpetuity. So the contractor put a price tag of about $2 million to lose that staging area. In addition to these 4 projects that are in the program, we certainly anticipate over the next year, 7 to 10 years that there will be a handful of other projects that come to light that aren't currently identified that would probably trigger Act 50 jurisdiction under the thresholds established with the Linden project.
So let me back up. So the staging area where you might have been holding equipment and materials to do the project, because you have a staging area, it has to go through Act 250, and so that will track with the property forever.
Correct. Yes, once lands are deemed involved when under a permitted project, they are ineffective under Act 250 jurisdiction in perpetuity. So
And the place that you were gonna have a staging area for this was not on state land. It was a private landowner, so they said no.
if their land was to be jurisdictional, that is correct.
Okay.
Now, I will say, we have since refined the scope of this project, so this is no longer a problem. We've migrated to a rehabilitation instead of replacement. But this is the most recent example we have. And largely, we've chosen rehabilitation because of some of the costs associated with the project, and not strictly Act 250, but other costs as well. So again, these were just a snapshot in time.
So this is not an issue anymore.
This is not an issue anymore.
Okay.
We do believe some of these other projects will absolutely be an issue. And certainly, the Senate Transportation Committee heard, but we've got dozens, if not hundreds of deteriorating deep culverts. And ultimately, to access those deep culverts require a significant amount of earthwork, a significant amount of staging area. And so we do expect those to trigger Act 250 under the current sort of thresholds and limits.
Just something I think it's about Act 250. It's very rare to have a project, a property not have jurisdiction anymore, but that has happened. We had one in my district. So it's very rare, but a property can go out of Act 250 jurisdiction if there are certain circumstances.
And I guess I would also add that, given the volume of material we have to remove for this isn't necessarily in staging areas. It could be waste sites, where we are depositing excess material and things like that. And I think, one of the things I want to stress is it's a land use permit under the Land Use Review Board, and the land use is in no way changing, and to a large extent, we're restoring the site to its pre-existing condition.
Yes,
When you mentioned deep culverts, I don't know if you're familiar with this project, but it was after the 2023 floods on Route 116.
Yeah.
It was a massive
Yeah.
culvert.
That pond?
Yeah,
Yeah.
did that require Act 250?
No.
Okay, because that's a deep, huge culvert.
Yeah, that actually wasn't that deep when we
Oh, it's-
look at it through yeah, no, well, it is to, you know, and I guess I'm saying that just in context of some of these interstate projects that are like 50, 60 feet deep.
Okay,
Whereas I think Dell Pond was 20 something.
okay,
So as massive as that may have felt and seemed,
yeah,
we're talking things 2 or 3 times deeper on the interstate.
okay. But that's an example of a major
Yes.
culvert replacement that did not trigger it. And that was in wetland areas.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we did have to go through all those other environmental. reviews.
Yes, exactly,
Yep.
yeah.
Yes, go
For
ahead.
what it's worth, I don't know how it's in, I would want it to fit in with Act 250, but most culverts, given what's happening today, are too small. And the same is true of bridges, and so we want to ensure one way or the other that. And we also know that they're used as wildlife corridors. And so we want to, as the replacements are taking place, make sure that we are making them significantly wider so that there's room on both sides of the river in normal times for animals to cross, to use it to, as a transportation corridor. And I know you're, I'm sure, I have no doubt you're aware of that and keeping that in mind, but it's just something that there's an opportunity every time we replace a culvert or a bridge to make it much more friendly to wildlife.
And that's one of the crux of the issue is that by expanding the either waterway opening or create, you know, connectivity, by expanding that span, we trigger Act 250, right? It's the footprint, it's bigger. Now it's a footprint on previously disturbed areas, and once it's finished, it will look largely the same to the user, but it does require a lot of temporary work.
Well, and we're under orders, particularly within the Champlain Valley for the cleanup of the lake, and a huge piece of changing these culverts is all related to the cleanup of the lake.
Yeah.
Is
Is
Go
that
ahead.
FEMA, are these FEMA standard, size culverts that you're putting in, do they direct it or?
So under the federal aid system, all of this falls under federal highway, so we have no interaction with FEMA. My guess is the design standards that we've adopted as the agency and the manner in which we collaborate with the Agency of Natural Resources, these would exceed FEMA standards because not only do we look at hydraulic capacity, but we look at aquatic organism passage, some other terrestrial passage, and we even then go to what level of redundancy beyond those hydraulic standards. So my guess is that anything we install would exceed FEMA standards, but we don't look to them for any review or consultation.
I'm thinking from an MGRP, from my municipal level.
Yeah, yeah, this would certainly exceed those standards. So basically, how are we trying to achieve this objective? So again, modify the jurisdictional threshold calculation to net out previously disturbed land. So if we look at kind of a trapezoid of the interstate, we would take that fill slope that was built 30, 40 years ago and not include that as current disturbance because it was previously disturbed. So any calculation would only look at earth disturbance that was not previously disturbed by the building of the interstate or the transportation asset at large. Anything beyond those limits would go into the 10-acre calculation. We would add a definition to a transportation facility, just again, so that that's crystal clear as far as what assets we are talking about. And in doing that, we're also recognizing that contemporary engineering standards, and that's what we just talked about, require oftentimes upsizing of these assets for any number of reasons, including resiliency, wildlife connectivity, et cetera. Also recognizing that anything we use federal funds for falls under NEPA, state permitting, and you know, oftentimes those are much more strenuous than Act 250 for the applicable criteria. this just gives us an idea of the process we go through to ensure environmental compliance. So we identify resources and avoid alternatives. And again, that's everything from wetlands to archaeological sensitive sites. We do project scoping and again, largely try to minimize those impacts to the degree possible. Once we get our state and or federal permits, we can get a positive finding under NEPA. And if anything does change, we do have to do a NEPA reevaluation. So as the design progresses, if we make any changes, there's a NEPA reevaluation process. So this is just to highlight that this does not largely fundamentally change what we're going to do from a state and federal regulatory compliance piece. It just removes the land use portion of the process under Act 250.
So just let me, and I've got two questions in this. First, in the timing of this. So you can't do NEPA at the same time you're doing Act 250. So is there some estimate on a project like some of these projects, what extra time that would add to this? Because the time is important. And if we're duplicating between the permits, what's the extra cost for that duplication?
So there's probably not a lot of extra costs related to the duplication of efforts, because typically we can take the existing permit that we already received and use that to demonstrate compliance within Act 250. So there's not that. The time component is the big thing. And the problem that we have is it's entirely uncertain, right? So most of these would probably be considered major permits, which then you've got to have a hearing, opens up the door for public comment. And we don't know the outcomes of that. But if we just say, essentially we would be ready to go to construction before we start the Act 250 process, which isn't terribly far off. It's probably a little aggressive, but not terribly. To go through the Act 250 process could take 6 to 8 months, which effectively means a construction season. So again, making some broad assumptions here, if we say that there's 3% year-over-year cost escalation, just the time of the process could potentially cost 3% to the project. Now, if we lose, staging areas and other lands, or there's other criteria imposed on us, then obviously that's going to add significantly more cost.
Can I ask a question? I guess, do you have it sounds like the projects that you're talking about, either Act 250 wasn't triggered or it didn't become an issue like the Linden project. And that a lot of the concern is about what might happen. Do you have examples of projects that did happen that where Act 250 was a problem? Because it seems like it's somewhat speculative, and I don't want to make policy based on speculation.
Sure. So here's a project that we just concluded that did require an Act 250 permit. And essentially this is just the replacement of a bridge over the interstate at exit 17. There was some reconfiguration of the intersections of the off ramps, and then the slight addition to the exit 7, or excuse me, Route 7 and Route 2 intersection, otherwise known as Chimney Corners. So what we are proposing is you would see that
Can you tell, where is this specifically?
exit 17 on I-89.
Yeah,
just
Okay, that's what Colchester,
Yeah,
okay,
it's the one we just barely finished.
okay.
And so this is to the far right-hand side, the reconfiguration of Chimney Corners. That's the intersection of Route 2 and Route 7. And then as the bridge goes over the interstate, goes to the left side of the screen, that goes to the islands, just to help orient ourselves.
Great, okay.
So essentially what we're talking about is all of the green area was previously disturbed area when the interstate was previously built. The purple or reddish shading was newly disturbed areas. And so what this language proposes is that when we looked at Act 250, instead of including all of the disturbed area, we would net out previously disturbed area, and that would fall below the 10-acre threshold.
Okay,
Now, I think to your point, what did this cost?
yeah,
And that's difficult to quantify because we don't know how the contractor can price this, right? They don't open up their books to us. We could make some educated guesses on what the time cost, but because the contractor didn't open up their books because of the contracting method, we don't know specifically what some of these things ended up costing us. And that's why I'm using the Linden example, because with that contracting methodology, we collaboratively worked on what that project cost, and they were able to, definitively say, look, if we lose this staging area, this is what it'll cost, and they broke that down to us as far as time for trucking and moving materials and all of that. So yes, some of this is somewhat speculative. That being said, we do have some concrete examples with the Linden project.
okay, that's just one project, so. This is helpful to see the map and see what you're proposing in terms of what, now I understand better what your proposal is in terms of how you calculate disturbed land. I'm just wondering, and I'm totally open to making
Sure.
changes, don't get me wrong, but, I'm just curious, it doesn't, since we don't have actual data to say that this has been a negative impact. Or if we do, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, and it's difficult to definitively calculate what does a 6-month delay to a project cost. Right, as I said, we can say if you lose a construction year over year, let's just say that's 3%.
But is it always a 6-month delay? Aren't you simultaneously doing a bunch of things?
Generally speaking, we need to get our other permits before we can go to Act 250 because we rely on those other permits to demonstrate compliance with those criteria.
Got it, okay.
So it definitely adds time to the process. Is there some overlap? Is there always a specific 5 months, 6 months, 1 year delay? No, it's entirely case dependent. And if it's a 3-month delay between November and January, it's largely inconsequential. If it's a 3-month delay from May to June,
Yeah.
it is consequential.
Yeah. Okay, it might be helpful for me, because this is new to me, I'm not on transportation.
Sure.
Understand like your project timelines and how this would have been, for this project, how it would have been impacted.
Understood.
I would just say we have limited crews to do work and we have a very short construction season.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I would, the thing that I find striking is why can't we do permits simultaneously?
So typically, the way Act 250 works is you rely on your A&R, your federal permits to demonstrate compliance with the 10 criteria with Act 250. And without having those permits in hand and having the final design done, it's not even a complete application under Act 250. So you've got to sort of have that final design done. You then have to have your permits basically in hand before you even start the Act 250 process, because the permit's not complete. So these are examples of projects that would still require an Act 250 permit. So if we're fundamentally changing the use, it's new interstate ramps, those are probably unlikely, but any major realignment or corridor projects where we're adding climbing lanes or additional turning lanes, those would still trigger Act 250. Examples of those projects would be the Champlain Parkway, the 4 or 5 segments of Route 7 Pittsburgh-Brandon, and the 3 or 4 projects associated with the Route 2 Cabot-Danville project. So this isn't total carte blanche. If we are making fundamental changes to the asset, we would still fall under Act 250 jurisdiction. Examples where Act 250 would not apply, the Colchester Exit 17 project that I just showed, general maintenance on state-owned rail trails. Certainly Some of those culverts are very deep as well. Reconstruction of roads on existing alignment, intersection updates, replacement of existing culverts and bridges, which we spoke a lot about, and just, by minor upgrades to sidewalk, trails and pathways. So essentially maintaining the asset to current standards would, in all likelihood, result in no jurisdictional finding. And the exit 17 project. So we just have some, starting language here.
Where do you, can I ask, what bill are you proposing this in?
We don't have a bill in mind at this point. I think we're talking about how to
Oh, okay.
incorporate this into a bill, and that's where we don't have specific, addendums to a bill. We just got some generic language that can be inserted.
Okay, but can I ask, why didn't you, I guess maybe I'm just thinking obviously, but doesn't this make sense in the T-bill, and why not start it in the House's T-bill that you presented?
I guess that would be, we could have that discussion. I don't know that the House has,
No, but why didn't AOT propose it in the T-bill? I guess is my question.
yeah, I don't know the answer for that.
Oh,
I think
okay.
we were looking at this for multiple, approaches, and, we thought of maybe a standalone bill, we thought about doing the T-bill. If there's another, bill coming out of Senate Natural Resources, maybe that'd be the appropriate spot.
okay.
I don't think we have a preference on the vehicle, it's just a matter of, here's the language.
Okay, thank you.
So quickly to run through, what we're talking about here, and this is really the crux of the language. Land that was previously disturbed as a result of the construction of a transportation facility will be excluded from computing the amount of land involved, provided that the project is subject to this exclusion if the transportation project and it's funded whole or in part by federal aid. Again, the exclusion will not apply to new additional points of access or exit the interstate. So again, we're saying we recognize that's different. As used in this subdivision, previously disturbed means the land that has been changed by previous installation of transportation facilities, including roads, railroads, runways, taxis, airport aprons, trails, sidewalk, ditching, drainage features, ledge removal, utility door, clear zones, and other features associated with a facility. To provide more context, we define transportation facility to mean highways, sidewalks, bicycle paths, defined under PSA 2301, state railroads and rail bank lines and noise taxiways, airport, state and municipally owned airports. And then basically saying no permit or permanent amendment is needed for maintenance projects on the interstate system. Maintenance meaning resurfacing, restoring, rehabilitating, reconstructing existing interstate system routes, including functional replacement of bridges, culverts to meet modern engineering and environmental standards.
So just a question on that. It's a little bit surprising to me that transportation facility doesn't have a definition in statute. So this is creating a definition?
Correct.
Interesting. Okay.
And this is specific to Act 250. There may be some other definition for some other
Okay.
applicability, but for Act 250, this would create a definition.
Okay, and it is referencing 19 BSA, another part of statute.
Yeah, did you?
But that must be referencing just the highway sidewalks and bike paths.
Right. And then,
Right, okay, and then it expands on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
Did you work with Damian Leonard on this language, or is this coming, okay,
this comes from the AG's office.
Okay, thank you.
But obviously that would be the next step.
Yeah, you might have alternatives to that.
Do I have some questions?
Go ahead.
So this is very interesting. Did Act 181 impact this? Because some, you know how, I mean, some of your facilities are gonna be in here in the different.
We're not gonna do something in a tier 1 or tier 1B area that has 10 acres. I mean, I guess I won't say we absolutely want it, but it seems unlikely.
Well, but the tier 1A doesn't depend on 10
No
acres.
shade.
But that's my point, right? So that's not fundamentally changing the paradigm because the only part of 181 that would change our jurisdictional would be anything in a tier 1A or 1B area. And I just can't imagine that we would have 10 acres of disturbance.
Right, but the town, in theory, would have more authority over development.
Well, it removes Act 250 oversight.
Right, but it would have its own processes.
Well, we don't need town zoning permits to do our projects.
So then maybe that's something that we should consider. So it would be helpful to know how much of your facilities are in what would be in 1A. I don't know if you can figure that out. You probably could.
Yeah, I
Versus-
still think they're all defined yet, but once they are,
Right.
right, we can probably find out that. My guess is not a lot, because a lot of those areas in town, in 1A areas are probably class 1 town highways.
Well, there's like Route 5, Route 9, I mean,
Right, but those could
Yeah, like
be,
one-
like in Brattleboro, that's a class 1 town highway.
yeah. The whole way, it's a class,
Wow.
I thought only in part of.
Yeah, where there is boundaries, right, and I don't know where that aligns with the tier 1A boundary. But if we look at the 3,300 miles of state highway system, there's probably not a lot within a tier 1A or 1B area.
Probably mostly tier 2.
There's certainly some tier 2
I think most-
and I
yeah.
think the tier 3s are sort of along the boundaries of the right of way. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, it's mostly tier 2.
Yeah, but I think it's worth knowing, and I think it's the tier 1As are the areas where most people live, or, you know, a general amount of people live, right, a high amount. So they're pretty impactful. I mean, this is interesting, just first time I've heard of it, but we also need to think about how roads typically are next to rivers. I mean, that's how they were, that's how it was done, and reasonably so, because the rivers were the original transportation.
Yeah,
So this is a big deal, is what I'm getting at. And so I would like more details on,
yeah. I mean, so again, within tier 1A areas, I can't think of a project off the top of my head that would trigger Act 250 for us now, because it's not a big enough project to disturb 10 acres. So and that's tough to do in a 1A7. Related to your concerns about how we interact with rivers, I mean, we're still getting stream alteration permits, we're still getting construction and operational stormwater permits. This doesn't change that in any way, in any meaningful way.
and so A&R is regulating that,
Yes.
right? And I'm aware of that. It's all connected, so it'll take some conversation, yeah.
Yeah. Can I just say, it sounds like you're kind of shopping the language around, trying to find the right home for it, if I'm understanding correctly. And I guess I would just say, if we do take this language up, or if Senate Natural Resources takes it up, that it would be nice to see it in its final form again, I guess, is my request. Like if we could do some kind of walk review. if
Well, I
either
think
can-
we're gonna need to have some conversation
Okay.
as to what direction you wanna go with this.
Okay.
And we have initially had the conversation knowing that you've expressed to me that you may do an Act
Right.
250
Right,
bill, and,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
so
Exactly.
that therein comes what vehicle
Yes.
would
Yeah.
get, because
I'm
So,
good.
are you sure?
Actually, yeah, because he just answered it. I was
Okay.
thinking about state aid highways. If, you know, the town municipality is responsible, but you still have oversight on the projects, right?
Yeah, let me.
So if we are doing, say, a class 1 paving project that we are doing, yes, we have full oversight. If a town just wants to work on either class 1 or 2 or 3, then no, we don't have oversight. Now, we potentially would issue them a grant that would then still fall underneath and all of that. And obviously, if it was state funded or town funded, if there were any regulatory requirements within the agency and natural resources, those would still apply. So there's layers of oversight here. But ultimately, this does not change the regulatory framework as it relates to the Agency of Natural Resources or any federal requirements under NEPA.
So I was thinking of a project on Route 140 in Poultney. Between Poultney and Milltown where the road sloughed off into the river and the town ended up contracting to fix it. It could have been 10 acres though, if they let it go any further.
Yeah, I don't know the details of that specific project, but my assumption is that whoever was funding and or providing oversight of the project still had to work with stream alteration, public construction, stormwater, if it was of any significant size, per acre. So there's still that regulatory framework that we've got.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Andy.
Thanks, Jeremy. This is a good presentation. I think the clearest presentation on this issue that I've seen. I think in all 8 years I've been on transportation, the secretaries come in every year and said there's a problem with NEPA. This is the first time you've kind of provided a detailed language, so I think that's going to be helpful in the discussion.
I just want, all the examples you've given have been highways and the language also includes railroads and airports. And those often are in areas that are not obviously along roads. And so that,
I would say, railroad would include something like the Whale Valley Rail Trail that goes 93 miles across. And there are a lot of very deep, old culverts along that rail trail that, don't meet any of our environmental standards now. And I'm not sure, I have no definite, but it does raise a concern for me that what do you do? And that's mostly, in my area, mostly along the river.
yeah, I mean, the railroads go through some really sensitive areas. In my district, they go through extensive wetlands, which is one of the reasons why the train is always canceled and they use a bus instead. But it is pretty sensitive land, and so having an exemption through that kind of land would be concerning.
So I believe, and we could certainly have the folks from the rail team come in, that if it's an active rail line, it's got preemption anyway. So it doesn't, right? And again, if it goes to wetlands, Dana still has jurisdiction otherwise. Right, so it either has preemption, or if it doesn't have preemption, we still have to follow the wetlands requirements or any other agency of natural resources, lakes and ponds permits, things like that.
We see a hand from Michelle too.
Thank you, sir. For the record, Michelle Buchenhauer from our Agency of Transportation, to specifically address railroads. They do have federal preemption. However, we are required to get federal permits for those. So they're federal wetlands permits and that sort of thing that do apply, federal section 106 archaeological for those projects. Airports are already all jurisdictional, so no matter what happens on an airport at this point in time, they all fall under Act 250 jurisdiction. So while we put it in here, it is essentially covered under the current jurisdictional track. Okay.
I guess I do have a follow-up question. So, the definition that you have in here is not, for its own sake, it's because it's being used elsewhere, I assume somewhere in your language, particularly on the for the netting of land. Is that accurate? Is there anywhere else that having a definition of a transportation facility would be useful in terms of Act 250 definitions?
Off my head, I don't think so.
Okay,
So
great.
thank you.
Yes, thank
it
you.
Gave us
Yeah.
the opportunity to raise the issue for all of us and I would say to Senate Transportation, we're now late for our next.
We gotta go. Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot actually from this presentation. It's not aware of some of these conflicts, so really appreciate you taking the time to at least get our committee educated. So thank you.
My pleasure. Happy to come back with